guys, so I'm here today to tell you all about my top 10 favourite young adult books. I have an array of young adult books here, from contemporary to fantasy to even a little bit of non-fiction. I genuinely think there are some truly amazing books in the young adult genre, and I think it's a really important genre at that. I think it's wonderful to see all age ranges represented in literature, and literature that appeals to all age ranges, as well as being accessible to people who are no longer teenagers or are not yet teenagers. And some of my favourite books are young adults, so I wanted to share with you my favourites today, the ones that I think really stand out, had perhaps an impact on me when I was younger, or I still really enjoyed reading as an adult. But without further ado, let's get into the books, shall we? These are in no particular order, but I think the first one I'm about to mention is probably the first book that could be considered young adult that I ever read, and that is the We Freeman by Terry Pratchett. This is the first in a series of young adult books by Terry Pratchett set on his Discworld planet, which he has set many other books in, and some of the characters in this series come into the other books in the Discworld, collection. But this one stands out as being particularly directed towards a slightly younger audience, although it can be enjoyed by all ages. And it follows Tiffany Aking, who has recently discovered that she is in fact a witch and lives in the rural farmlands of the Discworld, and her little brother is kidnapped by the fairies and she has to go and save him. She is helped on her adventure by the We Freeman, who are the title characters of the book, who are a race of Pixies. Yes, not pixies, but Pixies, like the historical Picts, and they are very much little stereotypical mad Scottish men, although there are some women as well, but they're predominantly men whose skin is dyed blue with tattoo ink and have vibrant red hair, swear and curse and steal and drink, and are an absolute hilarious laugh. And I absolutely adored the series when I read it. It really is what got me into Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and I would still highly recommend this series to everybody. I've read some of the later ones in the series as I have grown up and gotten older, and I think they still stand up regardless of how old you are. And yeah, like I said, they're an excellent in to Terry Pratchett, especially if you read a lot of young adult fantasy and that's your cup of tea and you want to be introduced to a really wide fantasy world that Terry Pratchett has. But whilst we're on the topic of books I actually read when I was younger, I wanted to mention possibly my favourite young adult series when I was a young adult myself. Well, I mean, I don't feel like an old adult, I'm only 25, but when I was a teenager in secondary school, and that was Kate Tiernan's Wicca series, or her Sweep series as I believe it was published in the US, and is perhaps published in the UK now. I think my editions of the series are out of print and they're now available in bind-ups of 3 books at a time, which I think makes sense because they're all very short. I don't know if any of them are over 200 pages. So probably a good way to read them, and more words for your money. But this is the first one, Book of Shadows. And these are a young adult series set in an American high school, and follow predominantly our main character Morgan, who leads a pretty ordinary life until a young man named Cal comes to their school and introduces her and some of her fellow students to Wicca, or witchcraft, the religion of Wicca, and she feels innately drawn to it, and it's like she's been waiting for it her whole life. And it is essentially a slightly paranormal contemporary series following a group of teenagers and some other characters that come into it and their relationship with Wicca, and obviously lots of dramatic things happen too. It's difficult for me to say how these books would stand up to a reread now that I'm an adult, but I just remember the feeling of reading these as a teenager, and I was so enamoured, so in love. I felt so attached to this series and the characters. I found it a fascinating exploration of Wicca amongst what was just a pretty good, fun, dramatic fantasy-esque series, and I just loved these books so much. I still get a real warm fuzzy feeling thinking about them as an adult, and I could not get enough of them. There were over 10 books in the series, but I I could have quite happily had 30 or more. They were so good. But next up, I'll mention a young adult book I've read more recently. I think I read this one 2 years ago now, and that is Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. Louise O'Neill has 2 books currently out. I've only read one of them, but I think she's certainly an author to watch in the young adult genre. She's already had a massive impact on the genre and has a big fan base, and I can completely see why. Only Ever Yours is a dystopian novel which follows our main character Frida in her teenage years, as all of her time that she's spent growing up and everything she has been learning is starting to come to its full and be applied to what it was always intended to be applied to. And they're raised in a very strict sort of patriarchal regime where women are bred, it doesn't seem like women are born anymore, but they're sort of bred like test tube babies, I guess, and raised in these schools together to be the perfect women. And there are 3 main types of women. One that resembles a nun that then goes on to raise the next generation of women, ones that serve as wives and ones that serve as mistresses, concubines, those kind of things. The 3 sort of archetype female stereotype roles in society, and the way these girls are raised are just very hot-housed versions of the expectations we place on young girls and women today. And the book is very, very intense to read because it very much resonates with the real world around us today. Although it's set in a sort of dystopian science fiction type future where these girls are being bred and raised in these schools, what they're doing and how they're being treated doesn't seem that far off from reality, and it's very dark and it's very disturbing, and I would warn you against that in case that's really not your cup of tea. But I think it's incredibly impactful and powerful and just a wonderful book to see in the young adult genre. It's been compared a lot to The Handmaid's Tale, and I would definitely say it has a similar resonance and a similar feel to The Handmaid's Tale for a young adult audience, but I think it's one that everybody should really read no matter what age they are. I think it's a fantastically written, amazing book. A young adult book I read only last year and just absolutely adored was One by Sarah Crossan. One of the most wonderful elements of this story is the way it's written. It is written in verse. It's like one long poem, almost like the ancient Greek stories by Homer and Hesiod and all of those other greats. It feels like it's written in the original storytelling way. There's something really special about verse, as it has been the mode of telling stories so much longer than prose has. And that's very special, and I'm so pleased to see it coming into the young adult genre. It just goes to show that the young adult genre can really do anything, and can be a great way for people to be introduced to new types of writing and genres, but just as well an excellent example of those genres and writing styles. And I certainly think this is a great end to poetry and verse narratives, as although it's written in verse, it's so easy to read and you just speed through it. I read this in a day, I could not put it down. And it follows a pair of conjoined twins who have agreed to have a documentary filmed about their lives, and it's about the ups and downs and some things that come to the forefront of their lives during this period of time. And it's really just about them trying to navigate their teenage years. For the first time they are attending school as opposed to being homeschooled, so a lot of things are going on in their life. And I really, really enjoyed this one, and I can't wait to read more by Sarah Crossan. I just started Moonrise by her, which is also written in verse, and I'm sure I'm going to love that one too. Next up is another series I started when I was younger. Was I even a teenager? I might have just been sort of before my teenage years, and then read the rest of the series when I was in my early 20s. And that is The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. This is a epic high fantasy series all about dragons. It is one of my favourite books and series of all time, like without a doubt. I absolutely adore it. I never even thought of it as young adult when I was reading it. For me, it just feels like any other high fantasy series, and it's one I think all fantasy fans or dragon fans should definitely give a shot, because it's such a intricate, well-built world, full of so much to get your teeth into. It follows Eragon, a young man who discovers a strange blue stone in the forest. What is that stone? It's a dragon's egg. There used to be a race of people called the Dragon Riders, but they seemingly died out before Eragon was born, and there's only one dragon that is known to exist, which is controlled by the king that rules all of Alagasia, where Eragon lives, and he is a cruel king. So naturally everyone is after Eragon's egg and Eragon's dragon. And it's just a beautiful story. It is so wonderful, so complex, and I have reread it so many times since I finished the series. The first one originally came out, and then there was years before the second one came out, so it took me until I was about 20 to go back to the beginning and read them all together. And I think that's the best way to do it, just consume them all at once. I could just gush about this book for days, so I'm going to stop. Next up is a book I read whilst I was doing my undergraduate degree at university, and it's Looking for Alaska by John Green. This was actually lent to me by my friend Nicola, and I just adored it. It was one of those book lending experiences. It was absolutely perfect. It was my second John Green book and my favourite of the two I've read. It follows a young boy, Miles, who has convinced his parents to send him to boarding school, where you follow him making a new group of friends and meeting new people, including the effervescent Alaska, a young woman who he is completely infatuated by. And then something happens, and I'm not going to say what happens, but this book for me was very much about grief, and grief experienced by young people in particular, and the specific grief felt when a young life is lost. For me, it felt like such an honest portrayal of that feeling and how it affects other young people and the people around them, and it came to me at the perfect time, in fact, and that's one of the things about books, isn't it? The time you read them is almost as important as the book itself, and I think this was just a fantastic novel. But I did say I would mention some non-fiction in this video, and I am so pleased to see a bit of a non-fiction genre arising within the young adult genre. I think it's just fantastic, and one of the best books out there is This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. This book is amazing. If you've heard anyone talk about it, I'm sure you've heard them praise it. This is a book all about sexuality, specifically targeted at younger people, because it's a time in your life where quite often you're looking for answers, and it's hoping to open that box of answers for you and provide really important information. For some of the time I was at school, it was still illegal for teachers to talk about sexuality other than heterosexuality, and I'm not sure how much the sex education and the discussion of sexuality and relationships has changed in schools. I like to hope it's changed a lot for the better since then, but I can tell you this book would have been so special to me as a young person, and I'm sure it's been so special to lots of young people since it's been published, and I hope it becomes mandatory reading in all schools. It shies away from nothing and talks about everyone and makes everyone feel comfortable and like they have a right to be who they are, whoever that is. And it even has illustrations and excellent chapter titles such as Stereotypes Are Poo. Stereotypes are poo. I love this book. Next up is almost an author more than a specific book, but I will mention a specific book, and that is the young adult work of Benjamin Zephaniah. I will mention in this video Refugee Boy, which is a book he wrote quite a few years ago now, but Benjamin Zephaniah's books are just out of this world. They deal with topics I don't see or didn't see anyone else dealing with in young adult literature for a long time, and certainly not when I was a young adult. The book follows our main character, who's a young boy who's been brought from Ethiopia by his father to the UK, just assuming it's a bit of a holiday or something, when he wakes up and his father has gone. His father has left him in the UK with nobody else, because his parents feel that he will be safer in the UK than he is in Ethiopia. And essentially he becomes a refugee in this country, and he is taken in by the state, and it's about his experience alone in a new country because his own country isn't safe for him anymore. Like I said, for a long time I didn't see anybody dealing with the kind of issues that Benjamin Zephaniah dealt with in his books for young adults, and he has a few others as well, although I am starting to see a little bit more of that, and that's absolutely wonderful. But you might have been expecting to see this next book/series on this list, so you won't be surprised when I say that one of my favourite young adult books of all time is The Hunger Games. I think all of the praise this series received is so deserved. It is a wonderful book series. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. I had no intention of reading it. I thought it was just going to be overhyped. I watched the first film when it came out of DVD and thought, actually, this is quite a good story. I'd quite like to know what happens next. Should I just read the next 2 books and skip reading the first one, which is what I did with Twilight? But my friends, including Nicola, convinced me that I should start from the beginning, and I'm so glad she did because I loved that book. It was even better than the film, although I still love the film. I quite like all the films actually, and I like all the books. I know a lot of people don't like the last film, but I quite like them all. And I love these books. I recently reread them and they completely stood up to a reread. They are just fantastic. I am sure you're all aware of what The Hunger Games is all about. They follow Katniss Everdeen, who lives in District 12 of Panem, which has been segregated into all these different districts, and every year a boy and a girl teenager are taken from each district and dumped in the Hunger Games, which is a televised event where by the end of the time they're in this arena, only one comes out alive. And it's just fantastic. It is just absolutely fantastic. It felt like the pacing was fantastic across the series. It really built up to the culmination of everything, and Katniss felt like such a real person, and I think it was so important to see how the Hunger Games affected her, and that it almost touched on the idea of PTSD rather than just having all these things happen to her and it really not affect her as a person at all, because that doesn't really feel realistic, whereas I felt like all of the characters in the story felt realistic, and I really adored them all. I adored this series. It's worth all of the hype. If you haven't read it, all I can say is give it a shot. I think it's worth it. The last book, I'm not entirely sure if it counts, but I'm going to mention it anyway because I know it's published with the more adult version, and the young adult version, or at least a slightly abridged version, is in the young adult section of the bookshop, and I also think that's the version I read. I'm not sure what the difference is between both versions, but I think it's just slightly shorter. Anyway, that is I Am Malala by Malala. This is a non-fiction autobiography of Malala, who was shot by the Taliban and survived for trying to promote women's and girls' education in her country. This book is fantastic, and Malala is herself still a young woman and was a child and a teenager throughout the events of the book. And I think it's really important to see what other people are experiencing in different parts of the world from you, as well as being a story that's just incredibly invigorating and empowering and inspiring and makes you want to do any little thing you can possibly do to make the world a little bit of a better place, because Malala is such a wonderful example to everybody, and I would recommend everybody read this book. I found it, like I said, although very harrowing, very inspiring, and I would just recommend everybody read it. Those are all the books I wanted to mention in this video though. They are my current top 10 young adult books that I've read. This may change over time, but for now, these are the 10 that I would like to recommend to all of you, and hopefully you've gotten at least one recommendation from this video of a book that you hadn't previously read. If you have any recommendations for me, I would love to hear them, so please do leave them in the comments down below. Of course, if you have any thoughts on these books, I'd also love to hear them. And if you'd like to see more of these sort of top 10 favourite books, I was thinking of doing my top 10 favourite classics, so let me know if you'd be interested in that. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time guys, happy reading. Bye!